This wall art will look great on a bigger canvas. I'm using A3 size. Mine came frame but with some print on it, so I've painted it few times in white. In the shop I went to, it was cheaper to buy frame print than same size empty canvas. I leave the tape on the frame for now. To create the textured pattern on this canvas, I will be using all-purpose filler mixed with black acrylic paint. I'm using the filler from the tube as I found it to be more flexible and easy to work with. I mix it well till two parts are well combined. To apply the mixture on my canvas, I will use this putty knife with straight end. I take small amount of the mixture on the back of the putty knife and apply it on the canvas. I do irregular pattern and I pull the knife from different directions. I try to keep the rows quite straight. Make sure you take enough plaster to create the texture, not just flat spots. Very satisfying project. Not artistic skills needed, but still creates unique and a modern piece of art. I will be using 40 x 30 cm canvas. But of course they can be done on any size. I take masking tape and tape it on the edges. This will create nice and clean edge, same size as the tape width. To create the texture, I will use instant filler. I live in UK, but I'm not sure what would be a substitute in US. I use the one from the tube as it's smoother than the one from the pot. I've also added a few drops of water and stir it well. Using putty knife, I apply the mixture onto my canvas. Try to make it quite thick and even. With the special tool, which you can buy online or craft store, often found in bakery section, I start creating the pattern. Because the filler stays wet for quite a long time, you can play around with the design. If you don't like something, you can easily go over it again. That's why it's important to make quite a thick layer of the filler. Then you have enough to push and make the design. Once I'm happy with it, I start gently removing the tapes. I do it when the filler is still wet. I left it overnight to dry out Then using acrylic paint, I start painting only over the design. If you put something straight against the edge, you will be able to paint it nicely to the line. I start with drawing the design with the pencil. For the first one, I'm going with one big flower. For me, it's easier to first draw the design, which I will follow later on. This time, to create the texture, I've decided to use Plaster of Paris. I used to use all-purpose filler, but I think Plaster has much smoother consistency. You can follow the instruction from the packaging. I do it by eye. And instead of painting it later, I'm adding the acrylic paint now to the water and plaster mixture. More you add, then more intense the final result will be. Remember that Plaster of Paris dries out quite quick, so I recommend doing small patches at the time. The consistency can't be too runny, but also not too thick, as it will make it harder to work with. I take plastic bag and move my plaster to the inside. I cut the corner off. And now, like decorating the cake with the icing, I cover the lines I've made, creating the edges of petals. Then, using paintbrush, I spread it to the inside. By keeping the edge high, I make more of the 3D effect. With thinner brush, I make small lines to give the petal more realistic look. I want the whole petal to be covered, so with the bigger ones, I have to add extra plaster in the middle. With really big petals, you can make the edge thicker by applying more of the plaster. I sometimes dip the brush in the water and smooth out the surface. If some places were not covered very well with the first go, you can always allow it to dry and then apply another coat. But creating all the texture and design on each petal is much easier to do when the plaster is still wet. As the middle part is so small, it was easier just to paint it instead of making new patch of plaster. If you know me for longer, you know I like to reuse old canvas. So I found this one in the charity shop for 50p. This project can be done on any size canvas. I start with covering what's on this canvas at the moment. I will need few layers of white paint. To create the letters, I will be using 3mm thick plywood. I measure the size of the canvas, think of the design and adjust the letter size to it. To cut them out, I'm using my X2 laser cutter. I put the right settings and let the machine do the job. If you don't have a laser cutter, as it's of course a big investment, you can buy already letters. You can find them online or in a craft store. They don't have to be wooden. Just make sure they are a few millimeters thick. To glue them in straight line, I've decided to use the same piece of plywood as a guide. I put hot glue at the back of the letter and then press it through the hole. You can also just draw lines and use them as your guide. And one by one I attach them all to the canvas. And make sure they all stick and are secured in place. Using same white paint, I cover the letters, not only front of them, but all the sides as well. To create the texture around the letters, I will be using all-purpose filler. It doesn't need to be a thick layer. Random moves in each direction creates the best result. I also try to go between the letters. I don't apply it on actual letters, just around them onto the canvas. Usually I'm not the biggest fan of any kind of posters with quotes or sayings, but I like this one because it looks sophisticated and minimal. I have to give it a try to this trend. To create this texture canvas, you will need window draft blocker seal strip, which is basically a foam tape. I divide it into single strip and will use it like this. It has an adhesive side, so it's easy to attach it straight to the canvas. With this idea, you can play around. You can create any shapes and pattern you like. I think it looks better when it's nicely wrapped around the canvas edge. I will do it later. At first, I just leave long enough piece to do it. And once I'm happy with the design, I turn the canvas over and attach the sticking out parts. It's nice to use stapler to do it. I couldn't find mine, so I've used hot glue instead. I don't think the glue on the foam strap is strong enough to use it by itself, so it's better to add something extra. I also add a drop of the glue inside the foam. This way it will make it flatter, so it won't stick out so much from the wall. I mix acrylic paint with baking soda and paint the whole canvas, including the edges and the foam strips. My new textured art will be colorful and abstract. I start with drawing with the pencil my design. The technique I'm going to use allows you to create many different pictures. Maybe nothing with too many details, but flowers or landscape will look great. I take toilet paper and tear it into smaller pieces. I place them inside big glass bowl. You can tear them to as small pieces as you can. You could also use some old magazines or tissue paper. Once I have a fair amount of it, I pour hot water to the bowl. I make sure all paper is under the water and let it soak for a while. If you want, you can blend it when it's still wet. This way you will create finer pieces, but I don't think it will make a massive difference on the final result. For each color, you will need separate pot. Take a handful of your wet paper, squeeze the water out, but not completely. Add scooped white glue and acrylic paint in color of your choice. Mix it well for a while, making sure the whole paper is covered in paint. Using tweezers, I start filling up my design, small pieces at a time. I place it on the canvas and then tap it so it sticks to it. Once the rest of the water evaporates, the paste will become hard and well attached to the canvas. The shapes I've drawn I want to be slightly higher than the background of the picture, so I try to add thicker amount of my paste. I do one color at a time and I do the shapes art first. It's definitely a time-consuming project, but very relaxing at the same time. Good pair of tweezers will for sure make this project easy to make. Then I do the background, and as I mentioned before, I want it to be slightly lower than the rest. So I put thinner layer of my paste and then smooth it out with another tool. I don't apply anything on the sides of the canvas as I will put it into the frame. My next project, I start with taping long straps of masking tape on my canvas. As my tape is quite wide, I've decided to cut its width in half. I want to create small squares. Then, using filler, I cover the whole surface of my canvas. You can avoid putting it over the tape, but it's not a problem if you do, and it's just much quicker. I try to put quite thick and even layer of it. Once the whole canvas is covered, I take my plastic spatula tool and create the lines. I start always from the same side and go all the way across. If you are not happy with the design, you can go over it again. When the filler is still wet, I gently remove all the tape, one strip at a time. Then I leave it to dry, and once it dried out, I take white acrylic paint and paint the whole canvas. I keep it clean and simple. Textured and 3D canvas are still taking over on Pinterest and Instagram. I'm not surprised why, as I think they are great wall decorations. There is so many different ways of creating them. I will show you how you can use polystyrene to make it. You can use piece of cardboard or canvas and then make the frame for it. I was lucky and found this ready sort of wooden box wall decoration. This is more spongy than polystyrene from the first project. I have only this piece, so I have to cut it in half to have enough for the whole box. It's almost like cutting the sponge for the birthday cake. I mark the excess part and cut them out. This is actually much easier to cut and doesn't make that much mess. As this is a square shape, I will divide it all into 16 smaller squares. Once I cut them and place them back in the right order, I can design the pattern. I draw what shape each square is going to have and mark which part is staying. At the end, I didn't use this circle shape as it just didn't look right. I removed them, keeping them in the same order, and paint the board white. I will need few layers for better coverage. I'm using hot glue to glue the pieces to the board, but you can use any other glue. It's quite tricky to glue it as the surface is very porous. Once the design is glued, I take some paint, which I've used for the background, and paint all the pieces Again, you probably will need few coats of paint, or if you want, you can paint them before gluing down. New canvas and a new design. This time I'm going with roller composition. Again, I start with the sketch. Few different shapes and sizes. I will work with one color at the time. I take small container and mix plaster with water and the chosen color of acrylic paint. This time, to apply plaster onto my canvas, I will be using palette knives. You can adjust the size of them to the size of the surface you are working on. I start from the edge and then pull the knife. This way the edge is higher than the rest. Okay, so what I did wrong in here is that I should start with the most distant petal. If you follow this rule, you will create more realistic flower picture. Then going more inside, I applied thicker layer on the previous petal. So think which part is the most far away from you and start with it. Try to imagine the real flower. You kind of building up the layers. With smaller parts it's a bit harder, but use smaller knife and apply small amount at the time. It's all about creating the layers. Canvas soaks in the water from the plaster, leaving the watermarks around, but don't worry, they will dry out without leaving any stains. Mixing plaster with paint makes the color more dull, but I like it. It's very delicate and pastel tone. You can make leaves with just one pull of the knife. As it would be hard to make such a thin flower stalk with the plaster, I just paint them, but I put thicker amount of paint so it doesn't look so flat. I'm really happy how this texture painting came out. It was such a relaxing process. It is really a great idea of creating more outstanding piece of art. And the plaster of Paris works so well. As this new project will cover the whole surface on canvas, I decided to use thrifted one, which was much cheaper than buying new one. Ideally, use a rectangle shape in the size you prefer. I will also need a jute rope. I'm using 4mm thick one, but it will work with any size. Smaller you choose, more times you have to go around with it. To create a unique pattern, I have to wrap the cord around the canvas in sections. I start with gluing cord's end to the back and wrap it around its wider side. Ideally, you want each section to be the same size. If I would do it again, at first I would take the measurements of the canvas and then divide it by the amount of sections I want. I make sure the rope is tightened as I don't glue it every time. I pulled all pieces very close to each other, not to see the canvas picture underneath. Once I got closer to the edge, I glued the rope to the canvas edge, just to make it more secure. First section is done. Now I move to the opposite side. Glue the end at the back. You can start wrapping from the outside of the edge to the inside. I don't really know why I started this way. Two sections are done, one vertically and one horizontally. Now I'm going to repeat the process, starting with the longer side and then the shorter. This time I wrap it around the already existed rope. The place of meeting two sections make the unique pattern. This way I cover the entire canvas, wrap its width, then height, and so on. If you want to save on the jute rope, you can always cut the pieces and just glue them to the canvas edge. This way you will save almost half of the rope, but it will take you much longer time. For me, jute is very boho. Its color and texture add unique look to your space. I hope you enjoyed today's projects. If you did, make sure to click the like button and let me know in the comment section which one was your favorite. And now, thank you so much for watching, your support, and I will see you in my next video.